What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you a video about Phantom Fury, an action FPS inspired by games like Half-Life and Sin, alongside road movie adventures. But it's important I tell you right here at the beginning of the video that this is in fact sponsored by the game's publisher, 3D Realms, and to that end, if you wind up liking what you see here, there will be a link down in the description below where you can check out the game, and it will be available on PC the day this video is going live. But with that out of the way, let's talk about the game itself. Now, as I'm sure you've seen on screen, and I've already told you, this is an action FPS with a big emphasis on utilizing a variety of different weapons to tear enemies apart across a variety of different levels and environments that just so happen to be pretty interactive. And if you are concerned about this game being a little too quick for you, you don't have to worry too much, as there is a difficulty option right at the beginning where you can choose between easy, normal, or hard. This is going to adjust enemy health, damage, and accuracy. On higher levels, enemies are more accurate and deal more damage, whereas on lower levels, enemies have less health and deal less damage. On top of lower difficulties actually causing enemies to move a little slower, which means you don't need quite as much working knowledge of how this genre of games happens to play to make the most out of it. Moving on from there though, let's talk about the story of Phantom Fury. What is this actually about? So this game is actually a sequel technically to Ion Fury, though you don't need to have played that to understand what's going on here by any means. As such, though, the game puts us in the role of Shelley Bombshell Harrison, the protagonist of the previous title, who is being brought out of a coma several years after the original to track down a legendary artifact known as the Demon Core, which is going to take us all across the United States, including locations like Albuquerque and the streets of Chicago even, or more desert-oriented environments. And all along the way, we're going to be turning enemies into a fine red mist with our variety of different weapons we'll be picking up along the way, such as various forms of handguns, assault rifles, bowling bombs, shotguns, pretty much all the classics and then some. And that's not even including more situational things such as a helicopter or machine gun turrets that you can hop on. So needless to say, it's a pretty lively adventure. But let's talk a little bit more about those environments, as it were. Now, as you might imagine, there's a big focus on level design and a surprising amount of verticality to it, jumping up and around things. You can pick up pretty much any object with our character's bionic arm, especially once you get an upgrade that allows you to pick up heavier objects, and you can place these and utilize them for traversal to get up and around places that you might not necessarily expect, and that's to say nothing of our own character's ability to move and traverse through small openings such as vents or simply slide and shoot at the same time. So as you might expect, the environments have been designed around having pretty high-octane firefights with all sorts of enemies. But that's far from everything, however, because the game also features a wide variety of interactive elements. Now this is traditional stuff, like for instance interacting with various terminals around the game to, say, find out codes or get a little background information on what has happened here, and even the occasional need to hunt down a color-coded keycard. But really that's only half the story, because there's a variety of other things we can interact with, such as arcade machines if you want to play a little mini-game along the way, or jumping on a machine gun to mow down enemies. But I think the real show comes from more on-the-fly interactions with various objects, such as, say, picking them up to use as cover, chucking all sorts of things at random enemies, utilizing the environment to set up, say, an ambush or a big explosion at the right time. For instance, when drones drop, they can also be blown up if they're shot after they actually die. So memorizing the strength and weaknesses of enemies can even play into this a little bit. So while the action combat is certainly the star of the show, don't discount everything you can do to interact with the environment, as it really does add a sort of extra layer to everything else going on. Next up, though, let's talk about weapons and upgrades. Now, it's important to mention right away the bionic arm, because outside of just allowing us to lift things, we also get a punch attack, which is just the base element of what the arm can do in combat. It can also be upgraded, doing things like reducing the cooldown on our assisted punch, but also throwing up a magnetic shield that will do things like block bullets, which gives you a certain incentive to get up close and personal with enemies as to either conserve ammo or simply put yourself in the middle of a firefight. But realistically, that's just one weapon in our arsenal, and there are a ton of others, all of which come with their own upgrade paths and extra options. For instance, while you can get an SMG, if you upgrade it, you can then dual wield that SMG. We can also pick up bombs known as bowling bombs, which happen to home naturally, but you can also then turn them into a cluster bomb if you so choose. Or something like the shotgun can get a disorienting flash upgrade, so even if you happen to miss or attack near a group of enemies, the flash of light will disorient them and allow you to get a little bit of space between you and them to, say, wind up for a follow-up punch attack or, say, drop a grenade even. So many weapons have either just upgrades that enhance their functionality or simply things like alternative fire modes that make them more interesting to utilize. Many of these weapons you'll find simply by moving through the game's various levels, as you'll encounter them relatively naturally. But what about upgrading them? Well, this is where level exploration is going to pay off, because throughout the environments we'll be able to find nano cores. These can be spent on the occasional upgrade terminal we'll find out in the world, which is where we will spend these nano cores to actually upgrade our various weapons in the manner of our choosing. And while I personally enjoyed my interactions with all the game's various weapons and fire modes, how the actual enemies you are fighting play into that is equally important in many ways. And while there are many a generic soldier to be jibbed, there's also other unique enemies such as mutants that happen to be a little slower but will chuck all sorts of objects at you, and they tend to appear in mass. There are also larger mutants that are much tougher to kill and have leap attacks. There are various types of soldiers. Some will come at you and sort of kamikaze themselves, blowing up, or heavier enemies with their own shotguns and grenades. There are also things like mechanical enemies, especially in the forms of drones early on, that while easy to take out will also explode after a short period of time, and you can either, before that happens, pick up and chuck the drone at your enemies, or shoot it from a distance to cause that explosion, causing even more mayhem. And overall, I think the game really shines when you start to throw all of those pieces together and start interacting with both the enemies and the environment to make use of your full arsenal of weaponry, such as chucking cluster bombs into large groups of enemies, hopping on a machine gun to mow them down before hopping off, only to get up close and personal with your charged punch attack before whipping out your shotgun and engaging in a little more close quarters combat. And those sections of the game interspersed with the moments that let you do things like hop on a claw machine to move some things around, or calling in missile strikes, add that extra bit of over-the-top action. And all of those things together combine to make a combat system that is pretty satisfying to mess around with, especially because the controls themselves are very smooth and responsive and fairly adjustable as well, as you can adjust things like your field of view or your overall mouse sensitivity to get it exactly the way you want it, which for me at least makes the feel of and the interaction with combat really satisfying, especially when you start doing slides into and out of cover, utilizing all your weapons, jibbing enemies, switching weapons on the fly, or weaving the punches into your rotation so you can use the punch to close distance really quickly and destroy one enemy only to whip out a shotgun and take out the other ones nearby, but then your upgrade for the flash of light goes off and sort of stuns the enemies around you for a second so you can continue the carnage. And then when the enemy variety ramps up, you have to adjust to those things as well. And for me at least, that was a fair bit of fun. Though in the course of all that mayhem, things might just happen to not go your way, with enemies somehow finding a crack in your plot armor. In instances such as these, it might be worth noting that the game does utilize a checkpoint system, so if you happen to die, you'll go back to the last checkpoint you were at, and during a mission, you can change the difficulty at any time if you're having trouble, which is just a few of the ways that the game tries to save you a little bit of time and headache. And what's more, after you've cleared a level, you can, from the main menu, restart any given level that you finished as you please at the difficulty level you would prefer. So even if this kind of game doesn't happen to be your usual cup of tea, it does have a few features in there that will help you overcome any difficulties as you kind of learn the ins and outs of what to do when, what enemies to prioritize, things like that. Though it is also particularly useful for any of those times you want to go back and, say, fight a helicopter with a turret. And so if any of that sounds like something you might be interested in, you might just want to take a look at Phantom Fury. And to that exact end, as we move to wrap up the video, do remember that there is a link down in the description where you can potentially learn more about it, as the game is out today on PC, but But otherwise, do let me know down below how you feel about this particular title, which of course means to like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.